Welcome to AI Shore Studio, the most powerful AI audio production suite built for creators. In the fall of 2019, a 41-year-old nurse named Renee Castillo received a letter from a law office she had never heard of, in a city she had never visited, regarding a man she did not remember. The name on the letter was Walter Briggs. It arrived on an ordinary Thursday, mixed in with bills and junk mail. Official letterhead, formal language, a return address from a city she'd never set foot in. Renee had no memory of the name, no family connection she could trace, no idea why a stranger's law office would be writing to her. But Walter Briggs knew exactly who she was, and what he left behind would force Renee to question everything she thought she understood about money, memory, and the quiet debts that exist between strangers. Renee read the letter twice, standing in her kitchen, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift. Her first thought was that it had to be a scam, one of those schemes that targets people right when they're tired and not thinking clearly. She called the number on the letterhead immediately, half expecting a disconnected line or a voicemail box that would confirm her suspicion. Instead, a calm voice answered on the second ring. The attorney introduced himself as Mr. Okafor, and within minutes, his measured professional tone made it clear this was not a scam at all. He confirmed the firm represented the estate of a man named Walter Briggs, who had passed away 3 weeks earlier outside Sacramento, California. Renee's skepticism slowly gave way to something more unsettling: genuine confusion. She had never been to Sacramento. She had never heard the name Walter Briggs in her life. Walter Briggs had lived alone in a small, modest house outside Sacramento for the better part of 3 decades. 86 years old when he passed, he had never married. No children of his own. The daughter he'd raised as a young man had died years earlier, leaving him with no close family left to speak of. His house, when relatives of distant cousins finally entered it after his death, told the story of a careful, quiet life: a worn recliner chair, a half-finished crossword puzzle on the side table, a single framed photograph of a woman on his nightstand. Nothing extravagant, nothing that suggested wealth, just the orderly, deliberate home of a man who had spent his final years thinking carefully about something he never discussed with anyone. Mr. Okafor explained that Walter Briggs had named Renee Castillo as a primary beneficiary in his will. Renee assumed at first that this meant some small token, perhaps a few $100s, a keepsake, something symbolic from a man who'd simply made an administrative mistake somewhere. Then Mr. Okafor told her the actual figure: $412,000. Renee sat in complete silence on the other end of the phone for what felt like a full minute. Her hand slowly rose to cover her mouth. She asked him to repeat the number, certain she had misheard. He repeated it slowly, the same number exactly as before. Renee sat motionless at her kitchen table long after the call ended, the phone still in her hand, sunlight from the window behind her doing nothing to make the moment feel any less surreal. All to understand why a stranger would leave her this kind of inheritance, you have to go back 16 years to 2003, when Renee was a 25-year-old nursing student working a rotation at a small, understaffed clinic. One night, an elderly man came in alone, disoriented and frightened, suffering what would later be diagnosed as a minor stroke. He had no family with him, no one to call in those first critical minutes. Hospital protocol moved quickly around him, but Renee, exhausted from a shift that should have already ended, stayed an extra hour past her scheduled time. She sat beside him, held his trembling hand, and talked him calmly through his fear until his daughter, his only relative at the time, finally arrived. Renee didn't remember any of this. It was one night, among thousands of patients, in a career built on exactly these kinds of moments. When his daughter finally rushed through the clinic doors that night, relief flooding her face, she embraced her father tightly in his hospital bed. Renee, having done what needed doing, quietly stepped back from the bed, slipping out of the room almost unnoticed, the way nurses often do once a family reunites. It was a small, forgettable exit, just another shift. Another patient handed off safely to people who loved him. Renee went home that night and likely didn't think about Walter Briggs again the next morning. But Walter Briggs remembered everything about that hour: the steadiness in her voice, the fact that she stayed when she didn't have to, the simple decency of a stranger who treated his fear as something worth sitting with. Walter's daughter passed away in 2011, leaving him completely alone in the world. After that loss, something about that single night in 2003 took on new weight in his mind. He never forgot the young nursing student who had stayed late, who didn't have to, who held his hand when he genuinely believed he might be dying alone in an unfamiliar room. Quietly, methodically, Walter began tracking her career, first through old hospital records he requested, and later, starting in 2015, through a private investigator he hired specifically for this purpose. It wasn't obsession, it was gratitude, the kind that doesn't fade with time, but instead grows more deliberate. He watched from a careful distance as she became a full nurse. Watched her get married and later watched her go through a divorce. Watched her raise 2 children largely on her own, on a nurse's modest salary. While Walter watched from a distance neither of them knew existed, Renee's life unfolded the way most working lives do, full of quiet difficulty nobody else sees. She moved through hospital hallways, across different years, different shifts, different units, always tired in some fundamental way that never fully went away. She signed divorce papers at her kitchen table while her children's school photos sat nearby, a reminder of what she was still building even as one part of her life ended. She came home late many nights, dropping her bag by the door, checking on 2 sleeping children before finally sitting down herself. She reviewed bills at her kitchen table under a single lamp more nights than she could count, doing the quiet arithmetic that single parents on a nurse's income know intimately well. In 2017, Walter Briggs sat across from an attorney at a wooden desk and began the formal process of writing his will. There was no dramatic announcement, no grand declaration, just an elderly man, calm and certain, signing his name slowly and deliberately on the documents in front of him. When it came time to name his primary beneficiary, he didn't choose a distant cousin he barely spoke to or a charity he'd only heard about on the news. He had the attorney type one name clearly into the document, Renee Castillo, a woman he had never personally met again after that single night in 2003, a woman who likely had no idea she existed in his thoughts at all. Walter left the attorney's office that afternoon with a quiet, satisfied calm, the kind that comes from finally settling something that had mattered to him for a very long time. During a follow-up call, Mr. Okafor explained the full story behind the inheritance, the clinic, the stroke, the hour Renee had spent with a frightened stranger 16 years earlier. As he spoke, something in Renee's expression slowly shifted from confusion to a dawning, almost disorienting recognition. The memory came back to her in fragments at first, then more fully. A quiet room, an elderly man's frightened eyes, a daughter rushing in with relief written across her face. Her hand rose to her chest. Tears filled her eyes before she even fully understood why. She stood up suddenly from her chair, pacing slowly through her kitchen, overwhelmed by a memory she hadn't thought about in over a decade. A memory that, to her, had been nothing more than one ordinary night doing her job. In the days that followed, Renee sat with feelings far more complicated than simple gratitude. There was grief, oddly, for a man she barely remembered, now gone before she ever had the chance to properly know what she had meant to him. There was a strange, heavy guilt that something so small to her, 1 hour out of a 16-year career, had apparently meant everything to someone else for the rest of his life. She found herself sitting alone in her living room many nights that week, staring at nothing in particular, turning the whole story over and over in her mind. Tears fell quietly onto the printed letter more than once as she processed what it meant to be remembered so completely by someone who, to her, had been a complete stranger. Renee used the money carefully, deliberately, the way someone does when they understand exactly how hard-earned it had been on the other end. She paid off her remaining student loans first, watching the payoff confirmation appear on her laptop screen with quiet, exhausted relief after years of monthly payments that never seemed to shrink fast enough. She paid off her car next, handing over the keys at the dealership with a calm, satisfied expression. And finally, she put a down payment on a small house, the first home she had ever owned outright in her name, with a sold sign in the yard and her 2 teenagers standing beside her in the golden evening light, looking at a new beginning none of them had expected. But Renee didn't quit nursing. She didn't disappear into a different life. Instead, she did something Walter would have understood completely without needing it explained to him. She opened a small fund, not for herself, but in his name, the Walter Briggs Nursing Fund, designed to help nursing students cover emergency expenses during their unpaid clinical rotations. The exact kind of financial strain she remembered vividly from her own life back in 2003. She printed flyers and pinned them to hospital bulletin boards. Young nursing students, reading the description for the first time, had no idea who Walter Briggs was either. But his name and the quiet act of decency behind it would now follow them into their own careers. Renee still works at that same hospital today. She still walks the same kinds of hallways, still nods gently to patients she'll likely never think about again after their shift ends. But something in her now carries the full weight of what one of those forgettable moments can mean to someone else, sometimes for the rest of their life. She keeps an old photograph beside a newer one on her mantle at home. A quiet, private reminder of a connection that spanned 16 years before either of them fully understood it existed. The kindness she once offered without thinking now echoes forward, deliberately, every single shift she works. Walter Briggs spent 16 years quietly remembering a single hour of kindness most people would have forgotten by the very next morning. He didn't leave his money to a charity he'd never visited, or a cause he'd only read about. He left it to the one person who, without ever knowing it, had shown him he still mattered to someone in the world. This story isn't really about $412,000. It's about the fact that you never know which moment, which small, forgettable act of decency might be the one someone else carries with them for the rest of their life. My name is your name, and this has been The Accidental Millionaire.